Ramayana, Divine Loophole, written and illustrated by Sanjay Patel. Ramayana, Divine Loophole presents a vision of the Ramayana like no other, with more than 100 vibrant illustrations, as well as sketches of the work in progress, maps, and a detailed glossary of the cast of characters, demons, gods, animals, and humans who make up this epic story. Blueprints, Act 1. Desperate Demon. Since this is an epic story, let's start with the most scandalous of characters, the bad guy. This is no ordinary bad guy. We're talking about a 10-headed demon with bad teeth. Scary as he looks, this demon didn't start out evil. He was actually a brilliant scholar, though even then he still had 10 heads, who meditated for thousands of years just to ask the gods for a wish. First, he fasted for 500 years, living only on the moisture in the air. Later, he stood on one toe and was exposed to the elements for another 900 years, never shifting a muscle, even during winds and rain. To cap it off, he repeated the holy Om mantra for 2,000 years without pause. He meditated for so long that he started to lose his mind, literally. The scholar decided to chop off his 10 heads as an offering to the gods, one for every 1,000 years he waited. After sacrificing 9 heads over 9,000 years, the scholar raised his sword to his last head and was set to end his life. Cosmic Bully. As the scholar's sword descended, the creator god Brahma appeared, willing to hear his wish. The scholar was smart, but not terribly imaginative, so he asked for what many men wish for, to be the most powerful creature in the universe. Luckily, this was beyond what even the god could grant, so the scholar asked instead never to be defeated by any god or demon. In what was perhaps one of the bigger cosmic blunders of all time, the Honorable Brahma granted this wish. The scholar transformed instantly into a new kind of ultimate demon, growing a row of fierce new heads and arms in which he wielded terrible weapons. He was large and in charge, a walking one-man army. Hostile takeover. The scholar-turned demon's appetite for power held no limits, and to prove he was truly the ruler of the gods, he decided to invade the realm of Swargaloka, which is kind of like a heavenly waiting room for near-enlightened souls. Wielding tremendous power, he tore open a portal that reached down to the lowest level of hell, unleashing a race of demons known as Rakshasas. United with his demon army, he drove the gods out of their celestial abode and dethroned Indra, the ruler of heaven. The demon king was known from then on as Ravana, which means the one that makes the universe scream. Vishnu's Loophole. At this point, the gods were in deep trouble with demons running amok over every corner of their world. They had no choice but to pay a visit to Vishnu, the god of preservation and general cosmic referee. The blue god of justice calmed everyone down and quickly pointed out that Ravana's plan had a divine loophole. Ravana only asked never to be defeated by a god or a demon. He was still vulnerable to humans and animals. Suddenly, there seemed to be hope. Vishnu then gathered the gods together and revealed a secret. He would reincarnate himself on Earth as a human to rid the world of Ravana. His avatar would be known as Rama, the Blue Warrior. Blue Boy. Not much later, as fate would have it, a special prince was born in the capital city of Ayodhya. Just as Vishnu predicted, the young prince stood out from his 3 stepbrothers, Bharata, Shatrugna, and Lakshman, because his skin was blue from head to toe. His mother thought he resembled a god, but nobody, including the baby Rama, could have guessed that he was the avatar of Vishnu. The king's own advisor was put in charge of educating and training the young princes. He guided them through their studies of Vedic knowledge, laws, and science. As the princes grew up, they bonded over their different interests. Bharata and Shatrugna shared a love of sport and competition, whereas Rama and Lakshman loved nature and animals. As descendants of the warrior clan, all four princes were masters in the arts of war. But among the four princes, Rama proved himself to be a serene and compassionate leader and quickly became the apple of the king's eye. Deeds of Rama. Rama and Lakshman were inseparable. As they grew toward adulthood, they were both recruited by an old sage, a Brahmarshi named Vishvamitra, who could see into the past and future and predicted a special mission for the duo. The Rishi, a high level of Brahmarshi or sage, wasted no time and began training his young recruits on how to harness the Dev Astras, weapons of the gods. He also taught them divine mantras and asanas that gave the young warriors profound strength and mental focus. One day during their training, they visited Vishvamitra's ashram, only to find that it was plagued by a demon named Tataka. The rishi explained that due to his vow of nonviolence, he could not take up arms against the demon. Instinctively, Rama drew back his bow, and the disrespectful demon was soon vanquished. As Vishvamitra performed last rites for the slain demon, he explained that Rama's action that day would have ramifications in the future and cautioned him to always be mindful of his duty. Break a bow, tie the knot. Before returning his two pupils to their kingdom, the rishi had another vision, which led him to travel with the princes to the neighboring kingdom where an auspicious test was being conducted. The challenge was to lift the bow of Shiva, a feat that only a god could accomplish. After hundreds of noble warriors tried and failed, Vishvamitra politely asked Rama to try. In a single motion, the blue prince placed his hand on the bow and lifted it high over his head. He quickly strung the bow, but as he pulled back, it snapped and broke into pieces. Luckily, this accident was considered a miracle and was cause for great celebration, as whoever was able to lift the bow would also win the hand of Princess Sita, who was actually an avatar of the goddess Lakshmi. Rama and Sita. Sita's father immediately dispatched his fastest messengers to Rama's kingdom to report the good news and to invite his royal court to a wedding. Upon hearing the announcement, Rama's father and his 3 queens made their way to the neighboring kingdom, accompanied by a grand procession. All of the guests watched as the enchanting princess placed a garland of flowers around Rama's neck, and together they circled a ceremonial fire 7 times. Thus they were married, and both kingdoms rejoiced. Rama's father was so pleased that he announced his retirement and proudly declared Rama and Sita the new king and queen. The royal couple lived happily ever after. Well, not quite. Exile. Kaikeyi, one of Rama's stepmothers, decided that her own son, Bharata, should be the next king and hatched a plot to do away with the blue prince. The jealous queen wasn't violent, but she was manipulative and reminded the king of the 2 wishes he had granted her for saving his life in battle. The crafty queen immediately spoke her wishes and demanded that Bharata be made the new king and that Rama be exiled to the jungle for 14 years. Despite his love for his favorite son, the king was a man of his word and honored his promise to the queen. Rama was stripped of his crown at once and commanded by his father to be exiled from the kingdom. Rama calmly accepted his fate and headed out for the jungle. Fortunately, the prince wasn't alone, for both Sita and Lakshman were at his side. Sadly, soon afterward, this chapter of Rama's youth came to a close when his father, consumed by guilt, died of a broken heart. Royal Rescue. Eventually, the 3 reached a forest called Chitrakuta, where luckily there was no sign of demons. But before they could settle in, Lakshman spotted a royal procession led by Bharata, who had returned home from a neighboring kingdom after hearing news of his father's death. He was horrified to find that his mother had banished Rama from the kingdom. Rama was happy to see his stepbrother, who fell at his feet and begged him to return to the throne. But Rama would never break a promise or disobey the order of his father. Bharata was amazed with Rama's integrity and was more certain than ever that Rama was the rightful king. Bharata announced that if Rama would not be king, then no one would be. He then politely removed Rama's sandals and explained that he would place them upon the throne where they would wait for the true king to return. Jungle Drama, Act 2. Forest Dwellers. What do you do when you have 14 years to kill? Well, for starters, Rama, Sita, and Lakshman decided to hit the trails and explore the forest. They walked south until they came to the remote Dandaka forest in central India. As they entered the forest, they sensed that the entire area was safe and sanctified by an unknown source. All three marveled at the sights of the forest and inhaled the pleasant smells of sandalwood. The sweet aromas drew them deeper and deeper into the forest until they came upon a colony of monks who lived and prayed in a forest ashram. Hermit Handouts. Lakshman introduced Rama and Sita to the monks as the exiled prince and princess of Ayodhya. All three were welcomed with great reverence, which was soon replaced with a desperate plea. The monks explained that the jungle was cursed with demons against whom they had no defense. Rama and Lakshman knew their duty as warriors and promised to serve and protect the colony. In exchange, the exiles were given shelter in the ashram along with divine gifts. Sita was presented with a sari made from strands of pure gold and precious jewels. A wizened sage named Agastya then bestowed on Rama a miraculous bow crafted for the great god Vishnu himself. Rama was also given a single golden arrow that could transform into any number of divine weapons of light and sorcery as he willed it. Finally, the sage unsheathed a magnificent sword with a silver scabbard that could fell any demon and presented it to Lakshman. But Agastya quickly cautioned that these were weapons of the gods, and their special powers would only work in defense of an attack, for they were not meant to start violence. For the next 13 years, Rama, Sita, and Lakshman wandered from ashram to ashram in the jungle, personally ensuring everyone's safety. They stayed at each ashram for several months at a time, and in turn the monks taught them about the bounty of nature. Over the years, they became experts in all variety of plants, trees, roots, and animals. Once Rama even went so far as to name an attractive variety of custard apples after Sita, calling it Sitafal. In turn, Sita did the same, naming a different color of the same fruit, Ramafal. Eventually, the three built a cottage in the lush hills of Panchavati. They found comfort in their routine and lived peacefully under the watchful eye of a great guardian eagle named Jatayu. Little did they know that their journey was about to come to a surprising end, all because of Rama's good looks. Fatal Attraction. One day, a demon named Sur Panaka, who happened to be Ravana's sister, spotted Rama and fell in love with him. I know, gross, but hey, demons have hearts as well, even if they want to eat everyone else's most of the time. Luckily, this shape-shifting demon wasn't hungry, but she was love-struck, so much so that she transformed herself into a beautiful maiden and tried making a pass at the blue prince by showing off some of her dance moves. But Rama couldn't be tempted, for he was too in love with Sita, who, as luck would have it, stumbled upon the awkward situation. Nosy Demon. The moment Supernaka caught sight of Sita, she flew into a jealous rage. As her face and body started to swell up with dark blood, she revealed her true demon form. Her deformed body was hulking in comparison to the delicate frame of Sita, who stood frozen at the horrible sight. The demon bared her fangs and raised her claws toward the princess. But before Supernaka could strike, Rama intervened. He told the demon that if she would leave and promise never to return, her life would be spared. As he waited for her response, Lakshman burst upon the scene, brandishing his sword, ready to chop the demon down. But before Lakshman could strike, Rama ordered him to lower his weapon. Supernaka cursed the three of them and swore that she would destroy Sita when their guard was down. The creature's words enraged Lakshman, and he sent his sword flying, cutting off the demon's nose. Howling in pain, Supernaka fled from the jungle. The crisis was averted, or so they thought. Supernaka was seething with rage and hurried back to her brother Ravana's lair. She spoke cunningly to Ravana in hopes of fanning his fury. She explained what had happened and how it was only a matter of time before Rama and his brother marched toward his domain and destroyed his throne. The demon knew this mortal was special, so he took no chances. Ravana commanded his chief to gather his entire army of thousands of demons and make ready for war. Supernaka personally led the death squad to Rama's doorstep to reclaim her honor. Divine Arrow. Back in the jungle, Rama got wind of the trouble marching toward his doorstep. He immediately instructed Lakshman to take Sita to a nearby cave and guard her until it was safe. Rama armed himself with the bow of Vishnu and strung it as tightly as possible. As the terrible demon army approached, they raised a cloud of dust that obscured the skies and turned day to twilight, heightening the night walker's powers. The trees all around Rama's cottage shook as thousands of glowing eyes slowly emerged from the shade of the jungle. The gruesome demons charged at Rama with all kinds of dreadful weapons, but the prince stood his ground, raising up his golden bow and notching it with the enchanted arrow. He drew the bow back so far that it formed a near-perfect circle. The blue prince summoned up his training from the great rishi Vishamitra and closed his eyes while speaking the Gayatri mantra, thus invoking the infinite power of the sun to his aid. He held the bowstring taut until the wave of demons was upon him. Rama prayed, knowing that he faced thousands of foes. Luckily, a single enchanted arrow was all the blue prince needed to even out his odds. For after the special arrow was fired, it instantly multiplied into thousands of arrows that flew in every direction, casting a veil of death upon the landscape. The terrible weapon leveled an entire patch of the jungle, decimating the demon army. Countless demons were pinned to the earth by the deadly missiles, and their axes, maces, and sickles all lay shattered and ruined. After fully meeting its mark, the golden arrow reappeared in Rama's hand, ready to be used again. Aftermath. Far away in the capital city of Lanka, Ravana was surprised to see Surpanaka back in his court. The demon brought news of Rama's victory over the jungle demons and goaded Ravana into believing that his own throne was truly in grave danger of being toppled by this mortal. The demon king looked into the future and was stunned to see his army fallen and destroyed at the hand of Rama. Surpanaka then cunningly told Ravana about Sita and her incredible beauty and devotion, which piqued Ravana's interest. He had stolen many beautiful maidens to populate his harem and was always delighted to make another conquest. Ravana wasn't too sure what sort of magic tricks Rama still had up his sleeve, but he wasted no time in crafting an evil plan of kidnapping and revenge. Life returned to normal in the jungle as nature wiped away all the evidence of warfare and the hills began to blossom once again. One day, Sita spotted a very unusual creature. It was a deer unlike any she had ever seen before. As the creature moved, its pelt shimmered like pure gold. Holding her breath, Sita moved as slowly as possible and extended her hand toward the deer. Just then, Rama and Lakshman approached through the trees, startling the deer. In one easy hop, it vanished into the jungle. Still mesmerized, Sita begged Rama to catch the animal for her. Lakshman, ever cautious, told his brother that there was something odd about the deer. Rama agreed and asked Lakshman to stay with the princess and guard her with his life while he retrieved the animal. Deer of Deception. As Rama chased the deer farther and farther away from the cottage, he grew suspicious and decided to shoot it down. As the creature fell, its disguise slipped away, revealing its true identity. It was another demon, Ravana's uncle, Maricha, and even as it lay dying, it laughed at Rama for falling into a trap. The demonic deer grinned, oozing blood from its mouth, and told Rama that today he would atone for his previous crimes. The prince had no idea what the demon was talking about, which was no surprise to the demon, since Maricha knew that the prince had forgotten taking the life of his mother, Tiktaka, while training with the Brahmarshi. Maricha had waited for years for this day and finally felt he was on the verge of avenging his mother's death. With its last breath, the demonic deer told Rama that now it was his time to face his karma, and then cried out for help, imitating Rama's voice perfectly. Instantly, the Blue Prince realized he had made a grave mistake. Abduction. The false cry of distress echoed off of the trees, reaching Sita's ears. The princess panicked and ordered Lakshman to go and save her husband. But Lakshman did not budge, for he knew his duty was to protect Sita. He assured her that Rama could take care of himself. Outraged, Sita became hysterical and begged him to rescue Rama. The princess swore that if he did not help him, she would kill herself. Reluctantly, Lakshman gave in to Sita's pleas and ran into the jungle. But before the prince left, he used his sword to inscribe a protective circle around Sita and their home. The moment the princess was unguarded, Ravana, who was hiding nearby, approached the cottage, hatching a plan to lure the princess beyond the boundary of her protection. Inside the cottage, Sita meditated and prayed for her husband's safe return. As she sat in contemplation, she heard the sound of a bell. The princess rushed outside, hoping it was Rama, but instead she saw a sannyasi, a penniless wanderer, at the edge of her clearing. Sita greeted the stranger and brought water and food for the old man to eat, as was the custom. Her graciousness was not returned in kind, for the moment she stepped out of the protective circle, the man transformed into the demon king. Sita froze at the sight of Ravana's 10 horrible heads. The demon snatched up the princess and sped away on his chariot. Valiant Eagle. As tears streamed down Sita's face, she called out as loudly as she could for Rama and Lakshman, but it was no use, for now they were flying high above the trees. Fortunately, the demon's chariot flew right over Jatayu's nest. The majestic eagle flapped its wings, took to the air, and in moments was in pursuit of the speeding demon. Swooping in front of Ravana's path, Jatayu demanded that he abide by the code of kings and release Sita at once. But Ravana had no intention of honoring this code. The demon took up his bow and began firing arrows at the eagle, but Jatayu flapped his mighty wings, causing a mini tempest that deflected the arrows. The eagle clawed at the chariot with his mighty talons and snatched Ravana's bow, shattering it easily. But Ravana would not be bested by the mighty beast. With a powerful swing of his sword, the cruel demon cut straight through the eagle's wing, adding yet another crime to his notorious list. The mighty eagle fell from the sky as Ravana's chariot streaked across the horizon and disappeared. Search for Sita. By the time Rama and Lakshman figured out what had happened, Sita was long gone and the guardian eagle was dead. Rama felt defeated, but Lakshman urged him not to give up hope. Together they began looking for the princess. As the brothers made their way south, they entered the jungle kingdom of Kishkinda, where they came upon a couple of monkeys and a bear. The furry creatures introduced themselves as Hanuman, the white monkey, Sugriva, the exiled king of the Vanara monkey tribe, and Jambavan, the black bear and clan chief. The brothers were relieved to tell their story, recounting their exile and the kidnapping and stating their quest to find the missing princess. The animals felt sorry for Rama and offered to help. The warriors were surprised by their generosity, but didn't think what a few monkeys and a bear could be much help in finding Sita. Sugriva and Jambavan assured Rama that he would also have the help of their families. Their entire families. And so both the monkey and the bear tribes searched high and low for a month. But Sita was nowhere to be found. Monkey God. When the search party reached the southern tip of India and Sita had not been located, everyone lamented their inability to cross the ocean and continue the search. Even Hanuman was left scratching his head. Luckily, the old bear, Jambavan, had an idea. He didn't know where Sita was, but he knew a secret about Hanuman. In his youth, Hanuman had been cursed with an inability to remember how powerful he was, in order to keep him from using his powers to annoy the meditating sages. Jambavan decided to break the promise he'd made to the gods and whispered in the monkey's ear, telling him that he was no ordinary monkey, but in fact the son of the wind god. Instantly, Hanuman's divine powers were restored, transforming the monkey into a giant and sending his head up toward the clouds. From his new vantage point, Hanuman easily spotted Ravana's palace upon the island of Lanka. Hanuman squatted down, coiling up his energy. With a look of determination, he shot forward toward the ocean, and then, in one massive step, he leaped off of the tip of the continent. As he jumped, he shouted, "Jaya Rama! Victory to Rama!" in a booming voice, and then he was airborne. The group on the beach gazed in amazement as the Vanara was now flying straight toward Lanka, the land of demons. Princess Prisoner. Before landing on the demon island, Hanuman shrank himself back down to the size of an ordinary monkey so that he could sneak into Ravana's palace. There he followed the faint sound of sobbing coming from a small grove of ashoka trees. Stealthily making his way through the foliage, Hanuman saw several ogresses guarding the hunched form of a crying woman. Despite her gloom, she was clearly a goddess whose luster was obscured beneath a veil of grief. Hanuman had no doubt that he had found Sita, and he smiled knowing that the search was over. Just then the garden doors burst open and Ravana entered, demanding that Sita become his queen or wind up as his dinner. Ravana gave the princess 1 month to decide. That night, after everyone was fast asleep, Hanuman approached Sita and explained that Rama had mobilized an army and was preparing to rescue her. Sita turned away coldly, thinking this was yet another one of Ravana's disguises. Undeterred, the Vanara told Sita that the Blue Prince had not forgotten his oath to always protect her, which was symbolized by the wedding ring she gave him. Hanuman then took out the ring which Rama had entrusted to him and presented it to the princess. Sita recognized it right away, and, with tears of joy now streaking her face, she blessed Hanuman for renewing her hope. Burning Tail. Excited to bring back the good news of Sita's discovery, Hanuman was caught off guard as he was leaving the palace. The demons quickly surrounded the Vanara, who stood unarmed with his palms joined in a gesture of peace. With spears and swords held to his throat, Hanuman humbly surrendered and politely explained that he was an envoy with an urgent message for King Ravana. The demons bound Hanuman in chains and brought him before the demon king. He respectfully told Ravana that Rama had raised an army that would fight for Sita's freedom unless she was released. Each of Ravana's many heads laughed mightily at this news as his eyes flared with rage. His teeth flashed as he declared death to Rama and death to his messenger. The demon king then deemed that since this messenger was clearly a spy, he would first be tortured with fire, smelling his own flesh burn. Looking Hanuman over, the demon decided to burn what was most precious to a monkey. He ordered that the Vanara's tail be set on fire. Hanuman's tail was wrapped with oil-soaked rags, while the guards waved torches near his face, taunting him. Then slowly a flame was brought near his back and then down to the tip of his tail. The Vanara's lips trembled, but it was not fear that moved his mouth. He was chanting a mantra. Over and over again he whispered, Rama's name, Rama, Rama, Rama. Finally, the oil-soaked rags were lit on fire, but before Hanuman could feel the pain of the fire, he used his divine powers to extend his tail, keeping the flames far away from his body. The spectators stared at the growing tail, confused and mesmerized by the sight. Snapping his chains, Hanuman flicked his winding tail to and fro, setting Ravana's court ablaze. Hanuman jumped across the roofs of Lanka, his long tail dragging behind him, leaving a trail of fire as the entire city was set ablaze. Taking flight once again, Hanuman could see that all of Lanka was engulfed in flames. But deep within the fire and smoke there was one patch of safety where Sita was being held. Confident that he had fulfilled his mission, Hanuman finally let his extensive tail dip into the ocean, extinguishing the flames. The proud Vanara then leaped toward home, buoyed by the satisfaction of destroying Ravana's capital city. Endless War, Act 3. Oceans apart. Upon Hanuman's return, Rama's spirits soared with the news of Sita's discovery. The Vanara reported every detail of his adventure, telling the prince of all the things he had observed during his trip to Ravana's capital city. While he spoke, a faint trail of black smoke lingered over the horizon, evidence of Hanuman's fiery escape from Lanka. King Sugriva informed Rama that their army could commence the march toward Lanka immediately. Rama and Lakshman led the procession, relieved to finally be on their way to free Sita. But when the great army reached the shoreline of South India, they were unexpectedly stalled by the vast salty ocean. It turned out that none of the animals could swim, and from where they stood, the island of Lanka seemed to be another world away. Stymied by yet another roadblock, Rama fasted and prayed for a solution, all to no avail. Eventually, he grew angry and began to shoot fiery arrows into the waves, threatening to burn up the entire ocean so his army could cross. Fearing the blue warrior's wrath, the ocean diva, Varuna, emerged from his watery home and approached the shore. He explained that as much as he would love to help, it was impossible for him to part the waters, for even he, a mighty diva, was a slave to Ravana. Luckily, Jambavan was very clever and figured out a solution to the problem. The bear remembered that if a god's name was written on a stone, it would float. After trying several names on stones that sank, Hanuman tried Rama's name, and to everyone's surprise, the stone floated. Sugriva and Jambavan were thrilled and ordered their tribe to begin building a bridge of stones with Ramana's name written on them. The entire army of Vanaras and bears gathered up every pebble, rock, and boulder from the beach and set them upon the ocean. It was as if an entire section of the mainland had been stretched out into the sea. For 5 days, the animals worked non-stop to build what came to be known as the Great Bridge of Rama. Five really long days. Battle of Lanka. Once the bridge was complete, Rama's army marched across it to the island of Lanka. At the gates of Ravana's capital city stood the imperial demon army, equipped and ready for war. In keeping with the rules of engagement, Rama dispatched a final messenger to ask Ravana to release Sita and avoid war and bloodshed. But the demon king laughed off the request, declaring that the only thing Rama would gain from Lanka was his own death. Having no further choice, Rama instructed his army to make themselves ready for an attack. The bears uprooted trees and boulders, while the Vanaras tore down branches and gathered stones, making weapons with whatever might crack a Rakshasa skull. The jungle army stood ready to attack at Rama's signal. The blue warrior waited for the auspicious moment when the sun reached its zenith in the sky. The demon army, being creatures of darkness and gloom, would be at their weakest during this hour. As the sun finally reached its highest point in the sky, Rama issued the order to attack. A deafening roar erupted from the charging Vanaras and bears as they surged toward the hordes of demons, who responded in kind, blowing their horns and conches. The rancor was terrible as the armies thundered toward each other. Evil arrows. Before long, it became clear that the monkeys and bears were more than worthy opponents. The animals shattered, squashed, and ripped apart their enemies. Noticing their ranks dwindling far faster than they had ever seen, the demons turned to sorcery and began firing magic arrows that transformed into deadly snakes. The tide seemed to turn as Rama's warriors began dying by the hundreds. But then Lakshman picked up one of the snake arrows and fired it back at the demon army. As it shot through the air, it transformed into an eagle that screeched down upon the mass of snakes and began ripping the serpents to shreds. Soon the sky was filled with arrows turned eagles, and the reptile menace was annihilated. Ravana's own sons, brother, and best generals led ferocious attacks against Rama's army, but one by one they were all defeated. The war seemed to be tipping in Rama's favor until the demon king decided to take matters into his own hands. Ravana's rampage. After witnessing the destruction of his entire family, Ravana declared that he would enter the battle himself. The mighty 10-headed king could see all and kill in every direction. Making his way through the battle, he felled thousands of monkeys and bears, sending a wave of fear through the jungle army. Sugriva and the other generals tried to counterattack, but the cruel demon continued on, striking down everything in his path. Even mighty Hanuman flew toward the demon king, but was sent crashing down by a blazing volley of fiery arrows. Ravana spotted Lakshman on the other side of the battlefield and charged straight toward him. He knew Lakshman's death would cause Rama great pain. Fast as lightning, the demon struck Lakshman with a single mighty blow. Rama watched as his brother fell. He immediately ordered his army to retreat as he whisked Lakshman off the battlefield. All of Ravana's heads smiled as he declared a quick victory. Rama's generals rushed toward their fallen leader and began to cry and moan, for there was nothing the animals could do for the brave prince as he lay mortally wounded. Leaf of Life. Rama laid his hand on Lakshman's face and could feel his brother's life force leaving him. He despaired that the war was lost. Jambavan, ever wise, offered one solution that might save him in time. Once again, he turned to Hanuman, son of the wind god, and called on his powers of speedy flight. With no time to lose, Hanuman was dispatched. Swiftly, the monkey jumped across the ocean and the entire length of India, all the way to the Himalayas, where natural medicine grew. But upon reaching the mountains, Hanuman was confronted with a big surprise. There were plants everywhere. In fact, the whole mountain was covered with them. Hanuman was confused and didn't know which plant to pick. The sun was setting fast, and Lakshman's time was running out. Hanuman began to shake and panic. Mountain of Medicine. Hanuman prayed once more by repeating the mantra of Rama's name. As he did, his body began to expand till once again he was as big as a giant. Ultimately, Hanuman did the only thing he could think of. In a cloud of snow and dirt, The massive Vanara uprooted the entire mountain and balanced it in the palm of his hand. He shot across the sky, racing against time to return to Lakshman. The jungle army cheered as they saw clever Hanuman bringing back an entire mountain of medicine. Before the Vanara could even land, a strong onshore wind blew toward Lanka and across the hillside of medicine, carrying the smell of the life-restoring herbs straight to Lakshman's nose. He revived, and when Hanuman landed, they wasted no time in gathering the herbs to restore him back to perfect health. Rama thanked the shrewd Vanara and instructed him to harvest plenty of medicine before returning the mountain to its home. Ravana was astonished to see Rama and Lakshman returning to the battlefield. The demon king was frustrated and annoyed that the war had not ended. He challenged Rama to a duel once the sun had risen. At first light, the demon king of Lanka emerged proudly on the battlefield upon a mighty war chariot. Ravana shone as brightly as the sun itself, a truly magnificent warrior, and Rama realized that if the demon had not been his enemy, he would have been worthy of worship. But Rama knew that as magnificent as Ravana appeared, his crimes could not go unpunished. With great respect, Rama joined his palms and saluted the demon king with a fiery gaze. A hush fell upon the jungle army as Rama strode past the protection of his generals. Hanuman quickly intercepted him and insisted that Rama sit upon his furry shoulders so he could act as a chariot to ensure that the kings could have a fair duel. Rama and Ravana saluted each other and faced off once more, and soon their weapons of war lit up the entire sky. The blue warriors struck down each weapon that Ravana fired until the demon was left with only one weapon in his 20 hands, Shiva's Trishula, a 3-pronged trident with which Ravana could summon up the destructive flame of Shiva's third eye, a fire that could burn up the universe. Using all of his strength, the demon sent the Trishula's flames leaping toward the warrior. Rama knew he would be incinerated by Shiva's fire, and so he turned to the magic arrow that had served him so well in the past. He called upon the arrow to become endowed with the Brahmastra, a divine power with the ability to end all of creation, as it was wrought by the creator god Brahma himself. Rama fired the arrow a moment before the dark flames engulfed him. The earth shook as the two weapons collided. Equally powerful, the mighty weapons canceled each other out, leaving the universe shaken but still in existence. As the dust settled, Rama saw the Ravana was drained of energy and unable to move. Seizing the opportunity, Rama quickly fired 10 arrows, slicing off each of Ravana's heads. Undying demon. But instead of dying, the demon simply grew more heads. Rama began to panic, shooting off several more heads, but they all quickly grew back. Hanuman did his best to dodge Ravana's attacks, while the blue prince gathered himself. Over the demon's fiendish laughter, Rama heard the voice of Agastya, the sage he had encountered in the forest. The sage spoke in the prince's mind and reminded Rama that Ravana's heads could never be defeated, for they were an extension of his ego, which had no limits. Ravana had but one weakness, his belly button, which held the nectar of his power. Agastya suggested the prince quickly take him at this vulnerable spot, for the demon grew stronger as each new head regenerated. Rama summoned up the Brahmastra once again and charged the arrow with its power. The prince took careful aim and waited for the moment the demon was aligned with the sun before releasing the blazing missile. The arrow of light burned through the sky until it found its mark, striking Ravana directly in the belly button. In a blinding flash, as the arrow struck its target, the demon saw the blue warrior's true identity as the avatar of Vishnu. Ravana realized that he had no protection from a god reborn as a man. The cosmic loophole brought swift justice. The golden arrow had flown with such force that it pushed Ravana's body from the earth, high up through all of the levels of heaven and back down through to the lowest level of hell. The mystical arrow shined with such radiance that it extinguished the shadow of evil from every corner of the 3 worlds. The universe was silenced as evil was brought to an end for an age. Sita's honor. After the war was won, Sita was set free and restored with clean clothes and jewelry befitting her beauty. She was brought before her prince upon a royal palanquin. The entire jungle army stood breathless as the princess emerged and was escorted toward Rama. Sita presented Rama with a victory garland, but instead of hugs and kisses, Rama stared coldly at her and spoke with chilling words. The Blue Prince rejected Sita for having spent so many nights in another man's home. The princess felt so disgraced and heartbroken that she asked Lakshman to build her a cremation fire. Sita then spoke to everyone could hear. She declared that if she were innocent, she would be unharmed by the flames. Otherwise, she would gladly let herself perish before anyone who questioned her honor. Sita bravely walked into the fire and stood in its center. Glowing goddess. Sita's body burned with a golden pure light, giving her the aura of a goddess. Then Agni, the great fire god, emerged from the flames. The god explained to Rama that Sita was more pure than his own flame. She was faultless and perfect. Agni proclaimed that no doubt or question should ever be raised of her again. With this final word, the flames in the fire god were extinguished, and Sita was delivered back to Rama, glowing radiantly as a jewel. Rama kneeled before Sita and apologized for his behavior. As he explained everything that he'd done to find her, Sita's heart softened and she forgave him. The two gazed at each other with an abundance of love as the crowd cheered. Times have changed, as have customs, but love has always been complicated. Time flies. With just a day left in their 14-year exile, Rama, Sita, and Lakshman were excited to go home. Rama bid farewell to his comrades and invited his loyal generals to join him. They all hopped aboard Ravana's chariot and quickly sped off from Lanka. From the vantage point high in the sky, Rama showed Sita the great bridge over the ocean and then the tall peaks of Kishkinda, home of the Vanara tribes. Swiftly they passed over Panjavati, their home in the jungle, and over the Dandanka forest and past the hills of Chitrakuta. Before long, they crossed over the banks of the Sarayu River. The chariot turned to follow the river's winding path, for Rama knew that its swift currents would lead them home. As they crested the hills, a brilliant sight grew in the distance. Golden towers and gleaming domes rose majestically from the horizon as they rapidly approached the mighty gates of Ayodhya. Rama and Sita were finally home. King at last. And so it was, on the anniversary of their 14 years of exile, that Rama and Sita were both finally crowned the rightful king and queen. As Rama took up the throne, he saw the sandals that his brother had placed in his absence. Shatrughna and Bharata returned from their self-imposed exile and were honored to remove the shoes from the throne and place them back onto Rama's feet. With that gesture, the people rejoiced for the return of their king. One by one, Rama called upon all of his loyal generals and explained to his court what each member had done to serve him during their grueling ordeal. After 3 months, it was time for his comrades to take their leave. Jambavan and Sugriva extended invitations to Rama, Lakshman, and Sita to visit their kingdom so that they could honor and welcome them as kings. When it came time for Hanuman to depart, Sita gave the Vanara a very special gift, a necklace of her most cherished pearls. The Vanara welled up with tears and swore an oath to Rama and Sita to always be their loyal devotee and humble servant. And so began a reign of peace and prosperity that lasted longer than any other monarch's reign in India, known as Ramarajya, the rule of King Rama. To this day, much of India still celebrates Rama's return from exile and his victory over Ravana during the Hindu festival known as Diwali. The end.